Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the STP training webinar, Testing for Accessibility and Inclusive Design. Our speaker for the day is Michael Larsen. I'm Smita Mishra, a professional tester myself, and I'm excited to host you all and Michael on our STP trainings. He is the Senior Quality Assurance Engineer at Social Text and is a very well loved professional in the industry. He is very respected. Before we start with the webinar though, let me start with a few updates for you. The first one being, we have our next conference coming up, Spring 2018 STPCon, which will be held in the Newport Beach, California from April 9th through 12th this year. Our program committee has selected a range of world-class speakers across the keynotes, the workshops, and the sessions, and you can view the entire program on stpcon.com under the event schedule. And not to our surprise, our speaker today, Michael Larsen, is also presenting a workshop at the conference. So, Michael, very welcome on the show. And do you want to actually share with us briefly, what is the workshop going to be about?
Certainly, I would be happy to. First off, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today. So the one thing I want to mention is what you are going to be seeing in this webinar is a bit of what we're going to be showing in the workshop. The difference being, of course, that what I'm showing you in this webinar is a very condensed and rapid fire 5,000 foot view of what we would be covering. During the actual workshop, we're going to go through and use these tools in depth to be able to do an actual testing, a number of testing sessions, to be able to determine the issues, actually figure out what the problems are, how to present those problems, how to advocate for their fixing. And since the site that we'll be working on is something I have access to, and I should mention is a live site, we will actually be able to fix those in real time and be able to put them up and show our improvements. So that's the plan for it. Please, if you would like to participate in this workshop, I'd love to have you attend. And if you can't, please share it with your friends and see if they would like to attend. Because regardless of how many people get to be there, for me, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I want to be able to share these ideas and this advocacy with as many people as I possibly can.
Absolutely, Michael. I'm looking forward to your workshop for sure. Okay, another quick piece of information that I have for you is that there is an upcoming webinar, Automate Responsive Websites, Website Tests with Galen. This is by Pranati Birudugadda, I hope I take her name correct, on 25th of April, same time. And Pranati is a senior quality analyst at ThoughtWorks Technologies. She's a very accomplished tester and an upcoming speaker. The link is up for you to review and register, so please go for it if it interests you. And if you are on Twitter, please share the conference information and about this webinar with your followers and connections. Please do add STP's Twitter handle on to your tweets, which is @SoftwareTestPro. You can also add hashtag STP webinar to your tweets, and speaker's Twitter handle is also mentioned there for you to add. All right, so let's get started with the webinar today. A very warm welcome, Michael. We are very thrilled to have you with us today. And let me quickly introduce you formally for all of us here. Michael Larsen is a Senior Quality Assurance Engineer with Social Text in Palo Alto. He has been an advocate for accessibility and inclusive design for the past 5 years. He has worked in a variety of industries, including internetworking devices, virtual machines, video games, legal software, entertainment applications, and social media tools. He is the producer of The Testing Show podcast, blogs at mkltesthead.com, and can be found on Twitter at mkltesthead. All of this is such a minute introduction for him, for he is so much loved by the community and is a hugely popular member of the community. So I'll leave the rest to him. All right, Michael, very warm welcome again, and the floor is all yours. I'm going to share the screen for you.
Okay, thank you very much. And wow, with an introduction like that, there's only one way to go from here, and that's down. I'm kidding. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And this talk that I'm going to be giving today in this webinar is going to be about accessibility and inclusive design. And the key point that I want to say is that I flipped the script for this webinar and also for the upcoming workshop. Usually, I do much more of a presentation on the whys about accessibility and inclusive design. Today, I'm going to be talking much more about the whats and giving you a chance to look at and play with some tools that will actually get your hands dirty and be able to start having these conversations. Again, though, there is some why that we do have to cover, so we're going to start there. Number one, let's talk about what accessibility is and why I have two definitions that we're talking about. We're talking about accessibility and inclusive design. Some might say, aren't they the same thing? The answer is yes and no. So the key point about accessibility, here's a definition that I'm not going to read exactly to you, but to suffice it to say that accessibility means being able to make the content and the services that you have available to the largest possible group of people that you can, including enhancements that take into account assistive technology. By contrast, inclusive design attempts to approach the same group of people, the largest number of users as possible, without the need for special adaptation or specialized design. And in many cases, a lot of the things that you could do to help your design for your site will go a long way to help everybody use it. And you do not have to be disabled or have a disability to be able to appreciate a lot of the accessibility and inclusive design details. Often when we talk about disabilities, we talk about the totals, the big ones, the ones that are all or nothing. So when we say, oftentimes when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about things like, being able to make a product use a screen reader because somebody is completely blind or their vision is so low that they have to use a screen reader. We also talk about auditory limitations, meaning deafness or total deafness or partial deafness. Cognitive challenges, and there is a large spectrum of them. I'll discuss a few of them a little bit later, some of which are related to actual conditions like Asperger's or autism. Some of them are just a factor of everyday aging. Mobility issues, in some cases total, in some cases partial. And there's a combination of all of the above, depending upon if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you probably will experience one of these, if not more, as a primary disability at some point in your life. However, I want to extend the definition a little bit and talk about secondary or situational disabilities. Imagine yourself trying to hear in a loud environment. How does your cognitive ability handle stress or immense distraction? What happens when you have a website that doesn't use responsive design and you have to look at it on your mobile device and you struggle to be able to scale in and see what's on the screen? What happens if you land in an airport where not only is, in my case, I'll use me, I speak English primarily, I speak a little bit of German from high school, a little bit of Spanish from grammar school, and a little bit of Japanese because I'm an anime fan. However, if I were to land at, say, Berlin Airport or Tokyo, and if I don't see some English signs, I'm going to struggle unless there's some other clues that I can work with. And on mobility, you're probably looking at this and you're saying lateral epicondylitis surgery. That's very specific. Why would I list that? And the reason I'm listing that is because that is my situational disability as I'm giving this webinar. Last Wednesday, I went in and I had an elective surgery on my elbow because of lateral epicondylitis, as well as a bone spur that was tearing up a tendon in my elbow. I am currently in a sling, in a nice big elbow bandage, and in a brace on my wrist and forearm so that I basically don't have much use or very limited use of my left arm. And so this is not just a theoretical concept for me, I'm living this. So let's talk a little bit about designing inclusively. Now, I also want to mention here that when people see the terms inclusive design, they're automatically thinking, oh, this is for the UX designers or this is for the developers. Why should a tester care about inclusive design? And the answer is, if a tester understands inclusive design concepts and advocates for them, especially early on in the process of discussing the development of stories and the development of designs, we can advocate for these. We can explain why these are important. The next few slides have some examples that are from Home Office Digital. Also, they have a GitHub with all of these examples in different languages. So if you would like to pull from that GitHub repo to look at these and put them into your everyday conversation, I strongly encourage you to do so. I'm not going to read through each and every one of these, just to suffice to say that these are some quick examples that you can look at and think, here's some things we should do, here's some things we shouldn't do. These are not expressive and covering of all situations, but they are enough to trigger some key conversations at important moments. So if you're designing for viewers with low vision, definitely use good contrast. Try to put all the information on the web page itself. Don't bury the information in downloads that they have to then get to later. It just adds steps. Be very clear on what you are defining, and try to make it so that the layout can be easily seen on the device that they're using. If they have to scroll and move multiple times, it's going to be difficult for them. Try to make it as easy as possible to view the information in one place as possible. Also, when you are using screen readers, there are additional items that you can think of. You definitely want to leverage the alt tag, because that will help you considerably to be able to explain content that your viewer can't see. Try to follow what's called a linear logical layout. In other words, your tab order should take you to the most important information on the screen and follow it. It shouldn't jump around or do something random. Definitely structure your content in a logical way. And if you're using HTML5, use the semantic options. It makes things a lot easier if somebody notices that something is an article or a sidebar. Definitely step away from your mouse and utilize your keyboard. And if you cannot get to information on the screen from your keyboard, screen readers are going to struggle to do it as well. Options for those who are deaf or hard of hearing: write in plain language. Definitely utilize transcripts or use closed captioning in video. Break up your content so that it is easier to look at and read. And also, again, my biggest thing I would mention is offer as many text-based options as possible for your content. Even if it's meant to be purely video, somehow give an option so that they can get to it by text. This is one of my personal crusades. And if you go to the Testing Show, which is the podcast that I produce, you will notice that every episode of the Testing Show has a full transcript available. That way, those who are hard of hearing or are deaf can get all the information from the podcast, as well as those who can hear it regularly. Other details for those with physical or motor disabilities: don't demand precision, give space. Look for ways that you can use your keyboard or speech only. And try your best to put things in one place where possible so that people don't have to do multiple transactions to get to things. Additionally, one thing that does not get covered very often when we talk about disabilities are cognitive ones. And here are some specifics about setting stuff up for those with dyslexia. So if you have images and diagrams, definitely use them. Use a consistent layout. Make it possible that there are audio files to perhaps listen to. Keep your content short, clear, and simple. And don't try to put everything on one screen. For those who are on the autistic spectrum, try to use, this is actually interesting because this is a conflicting, and here's a judgment call. You'll see it says here, use simple colors, don't use bright contrasting colors. Yet for those with low vision, we recommend using contrasting colors. So there's a judgment call here that you're going to have to work with and see what makes sense, and you'll have to strike a balance. Definitely write in plain language. Try not to use figures of speech and idioms that might be lost in translation. Try to keep your information simple. Don't create a wall of text for your readers to have to jump through. Don't try to make vague and unpredictable examples. Like it says, if you are going to use a button to do something, make sure that it says exactly what it's going to do. Don't assume that if you read a paragraph and click on a click here button, they're going to understand what's happening. So let's talk a little bit about meeting requirements. just to the requirements. Does anybody see a problem here? I mean, yes, it does meet the requirement. It does have a ramp to get onto the island there, but you'll notice that it's not terribly helpful. Also, when you use words together in a way that's not specifically clear, for some people, they're not going to be entirely sure that it means what it thinks it means. So, does our baby need beer and wine? Do they need multiples of each? Okay, so how do we start thinking inclusively, or thinking about how to develop tests that are inclusive and that allow us to test for accessibility? Here's a little acronym that you can follow. It's called Be Humble. And the first step is to humanize. Put yourself in the shoes of the person that you are trying to represent. Unlearn the techniques you already use. If you're used to using a mouse for everything, hide your mouse, just use your keyboard. Try to build models of interaction. Again, can you do everything on a keyboard? Can you tab to all the content that you wish to see? Does it make sense to do so? Build up your skills, build up the tools that you need. Download applications like screen readers or predictive speech that will allow you to run commands just through dictation. Learn how other people deal with these things, with assistive technologies, with other applications, with the options that your computer allows for accessibility. Get used to using all of them. And finally, experiment, practice. Put yourself in situations that don't represent you, that will allow you to take on the persona of a disabled user. As I said, right now, with my only using one arm, it's not a hypothetical, it's real for me. But other things that I do, for example, are I will literally put on a blindfold and I will try to interact with an application just using the keyboard and being able to verify that I can get to what I need. I will put myself in a darkened room and I will turn off all of the lights and all the lighting on my keyboard so that I have to do the same thing. I can still look around, but I can't really see anything. I don't have the restriction of a blindfold. I will also make a quick pitch here for the inclusive design toolkits that the University of Cambridge offers, one of which is for visual impairments. They have a set of glasses that you can stack on that create progressively lower vision. And they also have a manual dexterity kit, which are a pair of gloves that you can put on and you can adjust that simulate conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or difficulty being able to move your fingers. I did not include these in here because those are not free tools. You do have to pay for those. And the gloves are rather expensive. They're 150 pounds, I believe, about $200 US. So, however, if you do want to really start modeling and thinking, how can I put myself in somebody else's shoes? Those are neat little toolkits and options to play with. So let's get out of the hypothetical and let's get out of the sales pitch and let's start talking about this from the example of a real site. And I'm going to see here if I can switch views and actually bring this site up. One moment. There we go. So I just want to demonstrate and show that this is a real site. It is up on the net. It serves a specific purpose. It actually advertises for a music festival and it displays previous festival information such as pictures. It allows people to donate to the festival. It tells about how to apply. It talks about the organization, and it also has a section for announcements and going to the actual Junior Bach Festival concerts on their YouTube channel. So as just an example, click on a link here, and it just gives you the details for what's on the site. It's a very basic site. It's mostly informative, but it does have a little bit of interaction as well. Another neat thing about it is that it is a responsively designed site, which means depending upon the screen that you're looking at, you will be able to simulate how to interact with it as you will with whatever device you need to, whether you're on a phone or on a web page, etc. So It is responsive. Question is it accessible and inclusive? We're going to find out. So since I'm going to be jumping back and forth, we're going to have a little bit of interplay here. So let's talk about the first tool that we can use. And the reason why I mentioned this one first is no installation required. Anybody can access this immediately. And that's going to wave.webaim.org. And Wave is the first stop for learning about accessibility and just getting some quick, excuse me. Oh, that's danger of only having one arm. There we go. So in this case, let's just take a look at the website that I was talking about before. And it will load through and it will check it out. And let's see. Okay. And it has some questions and some issues that we can look at. What are they? Let's see. It tells me I have 13 errors, 17 alerts, 4 features, 23 structural elements, 5 HTML5 and ARIA tags, and 5 contrast errors. So let's take a look. What are the options that we have here? What does this tell us? Okay, the header or banner landmark is present. What's the alert and what are the errors? Let's see here. All right, 1. I'm missing alternative text. Where am I? Oh, okay. Excellent. Okay. So the little picture that shows up as the announcement, it does not have an alt text to explain exactly what it is. 5 missing form labels. Redundant alternative text. How so? Because it's repeating what is already mentioned for your bot concept. So that should have a different element to it. And the point being here, you can start to look through and you can say, okay, does this make sense? A link that contains no text, because it's just a more information tag. So a lot of these are going to be based on the theme that you might have for your site. It might be automatically generated, which means that this might not be something as simple as going into your web page and just changing a little bit of HTML. You might have to actually go into a theme pack and do some digging to figure out where these items are displayed. But that is an option that you can discuss and look at. The point here is this shows you a number of areas that you would need to consider and take a look at and understand what the problem is. Here, it's a link that contains no text because it's just an image. So here's a good, quick and dirty way. If you really want to get a fast, quick overview as to what could be out of sync with your site and what could be improved for accessibility and for inclusive design, no additional information is required. A downside to it, however, is that you do have to do it one page at a time, and you have to look at them and load separate pages to be able to analyze them. And if you make any changes, of course, you have to repeat it and walk through it. So let's take a look now at the next tool. So another option that we have is if you would like to take a look at such pages in the development tool space, I like using what's called the Accessibility Engine, or AXE. And the way you get to that is just click on Inspect, and it adds to your development tools. Click on Analyze. And the nice thing here is that you get a chance to look at exactly what the problems are on an individual page. Additionally, you can also do a number of changes and look at it in the responsive space as well. So for example, I want to look at it, how it might look on an iPhone. I can do that as well. So let's see, what are the problems? Elements must have sufficient color contrast. Okay, so that shows me where we don't have sufficient contrast, and we can definitely take a look at that and see what we can do to fix. And notice it shows right where the element location is and what the class details are for it. And so I can go in and actually make changes. To solve this violation, you need to do the following. And what it recommends here, and I'll show some examples of this later, are how you can make a contrast that works better. So it's showing right now that it has a color contrast of 2.83 rather than 4.5. And 4.5 is based off of recommendations by WCAG, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And where you can go to get more details for that. But the idea here is that you can go through and you can look at exactly where the element is, where the issue is, and you can determine exactly what aspect of WCAG it's calling on and what section it is to be able to make that definition. And I have a listing at the end if you want to go through and actually take a look at the WCAG element responses and what they are and how they're structured and which ones to look at. So if you're wondering what WCAG 143 actually means, you can go to the site and take a look at it. Get back to my pres. Another tool that we can use is what's called the color contrast analyzer. So let's go ahead and let's close out of tools here, and let's open up the color contrast analyzer. So let's look at visible content. Now this allows us to take a look at this from a number of different perspectives. So we can look at it from a level AA all the way up to AAA, which are different requirements. And the higher the requirement, the better it is for WCAG. The better that it is for WCAG. What's the word I'm looking for? Audits, in the sense that it's higher ability, but you also might have to make a trade-off for your site's design and aesthetics. So as you'll notice here, where you see the mask applied, if you see the mask coming up and outlining the area, that means that it meets that requirement of 3:1. If you don't see the mask, it means it falls below that. Colorblind users and those with difficulty with low vision might not be able to tell the difference to what you're seeing. If we include it and boost it up to the highest level and rescan, it takes a little while. And one of the reasons why I like using this tool is that it's very visual and it's easy to show the results to a developer or a designer or a product owner to explain, hey, this is, notice that only the title falls into, everything else on the page drops away at 7:1. So there's a lot that we can do for this if we want to reach level AAA. But if we want to go to a smaller version, then we can do so. Want to take the mask out, we can just view the page as normal. So you can toggle it to see the differences. Okay, so this next one that I'm going to demonstrate might be a little bit controversial, but I do think that it is valuable. And one of the things that I like about it is that it allows us to look at a page the way that it is written and determine if the information that is on the page is easy enough to read. So this is the audition requirements that we publish. Seems fairly straightforward, but could we do better? How does it actually read? Let's copy that. And I want to go to Hemingway editor, which is online. And it's just as simple. You can just drop in the text you want to look at, and it will analyze it. All right, so readability. It says this is a readability at grade 12. Now, one of the reasons why this might be a challenge is that the Junior Bach Festival is open to participants from all grade ranges, from first grade all the way up to seniors in high school. We might assume that, well, only parents or teachers are going to be the ones to read this information, but that's not true. The actual participants might want to read this, and it might be very difficult for them to read some of this stuff if they're not already up to a grade 12 reading level. It recommends a grade 9 reading level. I actually prefer working for grade 6 because I believe that that is a more inclusive range and it makes it easier. Some of what it's going to look at is it shows that there are ways that we can eliminate adverbs that are excessive. We have uses of the passive voice. We could remove that. Phrases that have simpler alternatives. And it has one sentence that is hard to read, but it has 9 sentences that are very hard to read. Now, the thing is, of course, it's not going to go through and it's going to tell you what to replace it with. That's going to be left up to your grammatical skills. But it can highlight areas that you say, you know what, this is awful chunky. There's an awful lot of big words here. It's a big wall of text. This is going to be a struggle for some people to read. So let's see if we can do better. Is Hemingway Editor the best writing analysis tool out there? I honestly don't know. But does it work as a nice tool for doing accessibility and inclusive design testing for cognitive disabilities? I believe it does a very good job for that. And I would strongly encourage using it. All right. Next step I want to look at here is a before and after site. So it helps to be able to see differing views from one page to another. And oftentimes what's neat is when you actually, and I love doing this for developers because it shows them the differences between a site that is considered not accessible and a site that is considered accessible. And if you click on the home page, and this is the same site. So let's look at the inaccessible page versus the accessible page. You probably didn't notice too much of a difference there. But if we were to look at the actual code and see what the difference is, the inaccessible page has the number of violations and issues that we can fix. And the accessible page has remedied those, and you can actually compare them to look to see what items need to be changed. You can also, for that matter, just go and view the source of the pages, put them in 2 windows and A/B test them and look at them side by side. And same, you can go to each individual page and look at them for the same. If you want to actually see what the annotations are, this shows you where the violations are. So again, this is something that you can always reference and you can take a look at and confirm if you want to be able to say, what's the difference between doing before and after? And the real big benefit to using this before and after site is to show that changing over to inclusive design and designing for accessibility does not necessarily mean you have to completely re-architect your site. You really don't. I will say, however, that it is more difficult to put in accessibility and inclusive design features after a site has been developed and published than it is to do it at the very beginning of your stories. So if you start talking about these things early, you will be able to have that conversation in a more meaningful manner, and it won't be as difficult a conversation. All right, let's go back to, I hope this will take me to the right. Will it pick up right where I left off? Yes. All right, so to kind of summarize from this, I also want to say these tools are great. They're very helpful. But the key piece I always want to mention is that tools cannot make judgment calls. Okay? They can identify issues and they can assert known states. They can confirm the presence of tags, but they cannot confirm whether or not a disabled user will be receiving a comparable experience to a normative user. That has to be done with actual interaction. It has to be done with specific insights and consideration. And also, to go along with that, tools cannot determine appropriateness. As I mentioned earlier, you might have to make a trade-off. You could make for very sharp contrast, which will help low vision users, but that might make for a difficult experience for those with cognitive disabilities. What's the fine line between the two? Typically, a person is going to be the one that's going to make that call. So are you still not convinced? Well, think about yourself in the future. It's a very good chance that if you live long enough, you are going to be dealing with some of these disabilities. Not everybody has the same normative experiences that you have. Put yourself in their shoes. Think about these design factors from the very beginning. And honestly, the person who most will likely benefit from this experience could be you. Finally, I want to put up here, and I'll hold it for just a little bit and talk through where these ideas have been discussed. The Wikipedia has a really good accessibility page. The British Standards Institute, which is where the Inclusive Design Toolkit from the University of Cambridge comes from, has a great rundown of what inclusive design is. If you were to buy a book, there's a lot of good accessibility books, but if I had to say right now that you only had one book option to buy, I would strongly recommend A Web for Everyone. I, of course, want to give a shout out to my collaborator and co-conspirator on both this talk and my original foray into the world of accessibility and inclusive design, and that is Albert Gureyev. Albert and I worked together on a paper called Black Box Accessibility Testing, a Heuristic Approach. So if you want to get into real nitty-gritty details of what I've discussed in this webinar, we cover some of that. The posters that you saw, the do's and don'ts for designing of accessibility, this is the original post that describes them. So by all means, go ahead and reference that. And each of them also, this links to the GitHub that you can go to actually download them. And this is where you get all the tools that I showed: Wave, Axe, Color Contrast Analyzer, Hemingway Editor, and of course, if you really want to get into the guts of WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, these are the links that you can get to, and the before and after demonstration. And one final little page I want to list here is, remember that the problem isn't so much one of tools, it's one of oracles. If you are struggling to make sense of the pictures that you are seeing, if you are struggling to put them into context, if you have to step back and consider, wait, is that appropriate? Chances are your tools are not smart enough to do it for you. Do not rely on these tools to cover everything. They're a good check. They're a good little piece to give you some safety, some peace of mind, but they will not solve all of your problems. A human being has to get in there and has to observe and has to actually see if it's appropriate. And with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I will turn the time back over to Smita.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for this wonderfully informative session. And we do have a couple of questions, which I'm going to take first. Excuse me. Okay. So right before you talked about meeting requirements and you showed us the example of the ramp for wheelchairs, you probably spoke about building on keyboard only. So here is a question that says, what do you mean about building on keyboard only?
Okay, I'm sorry, I did blow through that pretty fast. I don't mean building on keyboard only, but what I do mean is that we do very often design websites with interaction, and we use the mouse as the ability for doing that interaction. And sometimes by doing so, we make the process of interacting with those dialogues, for example, or clicking on links, or clicking on buttons, or entering information into forms, very difficult for keyboard only users. Remember, if somebody is using a mouse, chances are that means that they have full or adequate vision to be able to see where the mouse is pointing. Somebody who has low vision or no vision does not have that option, and they will be interacting with their system through their keyboard. So if you do not give them a clear option to be able to do something with the keyboard, it's going to frustrate them. An example that I often point to is a date picker. So if you have an option for picking a date, and the way that you pick the date is you click on the actual date picker, and that shows you a calendar with a number of items that you can select. That is great for a mouse, but it is terrible for a keyboard user. How do you fix that? It's very simple. If you have a date picker, if possible, put in a text box that allows you to enter a date in a format like month, date, year, or day, month, year, depending upon the country you're in. I'm in the United States. I'm used to month, date, year. But by having that keyboard option, you make it much easier for them to interact with the site and use it. That's a real clear example of making a design choice on that designs inclusively.
That makes so much sense. Um, Michael, this is a question from me, actually. I wanted to understand, on your parting thought, you mentioned about having oracles, like you should know what you're comparing to, and sometimes the tools may not really give you the exact kind of conclusions, or maybe the defects, or probably the differences that we are looking for, and the solution or suggestions that we are looking for, and tools are not able to bring them out, and humans should probably observe to look for such finer details. But what are we comparing against? How do
Okay.
I know? Yeah.
Well, I mean, the example here is if you are looking at these images as an example. So are you looking at a patch of snow, or are you looking at what I think is a Siberian husky puppy who's sitting on snow? Where does one part end and the other one begin? There's a bunch of images that they have on the internet that actually help with this. This is, for cognitive. There's a really cute one. It's an animated GIF that shows what it's jokingly refers to as spider moose. And if you look at the moose walking across the street, it looks like it has 8 legs. Well, if you wait long enough and view the image, what you realize is that by the change of perspective, you recognize that there are 2 moose walking side by side, and you don't actually have a moose with 8 legs.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
so the example here, like the cat found, is it's meant as a joke, of course, but as a tool, they might, if something is scanning this, for example, as let's say here's an example for machine learning or for AI. Are they really going to
I
get?
was, yeah,
Are
I
they
was
really
just
going to
about,
get that this is not even a cat? It's meant,
yeah,
of course, as a joke.
yeah,
Also,
I was,
take a look at the apple that's cut out that looks
mhm.
just like the owl face. Well, which one's the owl face? Which one's the apple? Will your tool be able to tell the difference? By the way, if this topic is interesting to you, just now thinking about this, and I will append the slides for this for the workshop, I strongly recommend, there's a number of versions of it on YouTube. Look up Karina C. Zona's talk, The Consequences of an Insightful Algorithm, which goes into detail how machine learning and AI and other stuff fails us here. In other words, it's a question of oracles. How do we determine what is accurate and not? And when does a person actually need to get in and make a judgment call? And it meets a lot of this. And that would be a good example to really get into details of when you're saying it's an oracle problem, what do you mean by that? What I mean is, very often we might struggle with, is something that we're looking at, does it make sense to us? Maybe. Is it going to make sense to somebody on the autism spectrum? Maybe, maybe not. How do we know? Probably we have to do a little bit of research. Probably we have to actually talk with some people who have that condition and ask them. See if we actually are able to, if they are able to make sense. In many cases, somebody with autism is very literal. And if we show them the cat found, that's not a cat. They're not even going to look at it as though it's a joke. They're not going to look at it silly. They're just going to focus on the picture and say, that's wrong. I don't get that. I don't understand what I'm looking at. And so we need to be able to step back and say, am I doing something that's kind of cute? Is it a figure of speech that's kind of giving me a chuckle? But will go totally over somebody's head if we actually present it in our application. That's what I mean by it's an oracle problem more than it's a tool problem.
That actually makes so much more sense now, because I was actually going to this AI and machine learning thing next, but you clarified that too. So thank you for that. Another question here is about your reading list and all the tools that you mentioned. That's going to be part of the slides, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so, okay, moving on to the next one. It says free tools doesn't guarantee the consistent results. So should we still use them, or there are some paid tools like Site Improve? Should we then use those ones?
I deliberately keep my conversations tool agnostic. The answer is, of course, every tool is only going to be as good as the person or process that uses it. And you are absolutely correct. Free tools may give you results that are not 100% reproducible. You may have times that you have something that might be flaky or that might behave differently with more understanding. And that's part of the reason why I mention, don't be so focused on the tools. Start with the problem and see how you can address the problem and how you can communicate about the problem. Remember, as software testers, we're the customer's advocates. We're the ones saying, this might not work the way you think it works. This might not give us what we think is going to happen. How do we demonstrate that? Tools can help us. It can explain the situation. We can compare it to a standard. We can run it through a process, and that process can give us an output that we can put in a report, and we can talk to it. But ultimately, it's us talking to it. So the tool that we use is almost irrelevant. If a paid tool is going to be more effective, if it's something that you can insert into your code and actually just run and give you a checklist that says all clear, if that's good enough for your organization, okay. I personally don't think that any tool process that you run is good enough that you can automate accessibility and inclusive design completely. I do absolutely believe that human eyeballs and human interaction and distinction is necessary, but what tool you use is ultimately going to be a matter of preference. I listed the tools for this particular webinar because they were free, readily available, and had a very low barrier to entry.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for this informative session and for all your list of tools. I'm really hoping the testers here make the most of it. And guys, if you want to hear more of it, please do join us for the workshop at the conference. And so, well, everyone, this concludes our webinar for today. Thanks for joining, and more importantly, thanks for being engaging and making the most of the webinar for yourself and for the whole group. And as I said again earlier, we still have time to register. We are 11 days away from the conference. And so testers, go for it. And locals, do have a look at the package X and please make the best of it. You can attend any or all of the 4 events and also pick any 2 sessions of the 6 offered in the package. All of this for free. So don't miss the opportunity. Come over and network, learn, and share. And stay tuned for more webinars and online trainings coming soon at softwaretestpro.com. And if you haven't signed up yet for the upcoming webinar, which is Automate Responsive Websites Tests with Galen, by Pranati on 25th April, then the link is up for registration. Please go ahead. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week ahead. See you all in California in April 2018.